celebration all towards one end.
In a letter to students and faculty, Harvard President Alan Garber wrote, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights." The Trump administration responded by freezing $2.2 billion in grants. Andrew Manuel Crespo is a professor at the Harvard Law School.
What's the significance of Harvard specifically pushing back?
Harvard's the most well-known and wealthiest university in the world. If this attack succeeds at Harvard, it will be a significant blow for all of higher education in America.
The school is among 60 universities the Trump administration has threatened with federal funding cuts unless changes were made to campus policy the White House has described as allowing anti-Semitism or promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
You can't have a successful research university if it is only allowed to study certain questions that are asked by the government, and if it's only allowed to give certain answers that the president likes or doesn't like because of the politics of the day.
We also visited Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, which has been notified by the Department of Education it could face cuts too. The school is already facing a loss of $800 million in federal funding, some earmarked for clinical trials of cancer treatments.
This is a critical component of how we do clinical research.
Oncologist Elizabeth Jaffe is deputy director of the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins.
We're very worried because what's happening is that one day we hear our grants are cut, and the next day we have to say to a patient, sorry, no more money's coming in, so we can't treat you on this trial anymore.
And could that patient die as a result?
Absolutely, because these patients are on clinical trials because they have no other options.
Johns Hopkins University is still under investigation by the Trump administration, so it hasn't received any orders for policy changes yet. Today, the White House demanded an apology from Harvard.
Well, Nikki, who's in Cambridge, Harvard is obviously not apologizing. It's doing the opposite. It's the biggest institution to push back in this way. And so given that, what are they worried about losing when this money goes away?
I spoke with a medical school professor who says his department has been hit with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cuts. That will impact research into Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, long COVID, and a variety of cancers. And he said what that means for Americans, and I quote him, is that people who could have been cured in the years to come will instead die.
And Nikki, people watching might wonder, why doesn't Harvard just dip into its endowment, the largest in the country? What's the answer to that?
A Harvard spokesperson tells me that endowment money, the majority of endowment money here is restricted. It cannot be used except for its intended use, and that is often decided at the time that it's donated.
Okay, Nikki Batiste for us tonight in Cambridge. Thank you.
We found the mood in.
Okay, so the people who donate the money, they're like, you can use it for this, this, and this, not this, this, and this, or whatever. So that makes sense. I didn't really think about that before. But I'm sure that they could do whatever they want to and just like move the money around. You know, it's all going in the same pot anyways. So, but you know, the attack on education can't be understated on this. But one of the things that this makes me think about is how, like, you know, a lot of these grants coming from the government to pay for this research that these universities do for cancer or whatever. And what's crazy about that is how, like, these universities are the ones that come up with these new drugs or whatever it is, and then it ends up being owned by a private corporation. Like, how does that work? When all of the research and development was done by public funds, how come a private corporation ends up owning that proprietary intellectual property? You know, that's like the biggest scam ever. You know, how come if the public, if the taxpayers were the ones who flipped the bill for this research and development, how come the taxpayers can't be the ones who own this intellectual property? You know, and then it can be sold at cost to the benefit of the people instead of marked up for profit for a private corporation. It seems to me like that's the biggest scam ever. Like, probably all of the most of the stuff that has come out technology wise, immunizations, cancer treatments, I mean, you name it. Most of it, I'm sure, was done in places like this in these universities and was paid for by the government. But all of them are owned by private corporations and they sell it to people for a profit. What the F? What the F? How come people aren't talking about that? How come people don't have a problem with that? They probably don't really understand it or whatever. I mean, I don't know. I really don't have an answer for that as far as like why I don't hear people making that argument. It's a real simple ass argument. So because that's what the whole argument is for these people making profit off of this stuff, is because we spent the money to build the facilities, to build the manufacturing plants to make this stuff. So, you know, we put that money up front, so we should get a return on our investment. I mean, and that's a fair enough argument. So, but if it was the government who did that, then the argument should be that the government should get the money back, or the people should get the money back. Caption, it says, Harvard said it will not accept an agreement proposed by the Trump administration for continued federal funding. In response, President Trump froze more than $2 billion in grants and threatened to remove the university's tax-exempt status. Couple comments. It says, bravo, well done, Harvard. Enough is enough. We're all in trouble in the U.S. Thank you for inspiring courage. Without courage, we lose our freedoms. Wealthiest university shouldn't need taxpayer $2 billion then. And I agree with that argument, but we're talking about the research and development of cancer drugs and so forth and so on. You know. So I'm sure that they could do it on their own, but that setup will be very different. And it benefits us that they're doing these research. Benefits the people. So that's good spent money. You know what I mean? Like you can't really call that waste. You can't really, you know, call that corruption. You know, we want to improve our abilities, our technologies, you know, our drugs. We want that stuff to improve. So that's the reason why this is in place for this. You know, you want the smartest people to be working on it.